The afternoon sun filtered gently through the porch of the house in Franklin, Tennessee, casting a warm glow on the tiny white and pastel outfits swaying lightly on the clothesline. Each onesie, each bib, each pair of miniature socks was hung by Jessica with meticulous care, a ritual of preparation for the life about to arrive. At 8 months pregnant, every movement was deliberate, the weight of her belly a constant and, until then, cherished presence. Inside the house, her mother, Mrs. Karen, folded one last cloth diaper, smoothing the soft fabric on the living room table. The silence was cozy, filled only by the distant chirp of cardinals and the scent of laundry detergent lingering in the air. "Everything's almost ready, sweetheart," said Mrs. Karen with a calm smile. "The baby's layette is the best part." Jessica returned the smile, rubbing the small of her back with her free hand. "Just these last pieces to dry. Nathan should have come. It'd do him good to unplug from work for a bit." Nathan, her husband, had stayed in Nashville, in the upscale condo where they lived. The place was more than a home. It was a sleek world of glass and steel, with multiple towers and a neighborhood that, in Jessica's words, knew everyone's business before you did. He'd claimed the need to work on a Saturday, insisting his architecture firm was just 5 minutes away, a convenience he couldn't waste on an urgent project. "He's a dedicated man, Jess. It's for the three of you," Mrs. Karen tried to reassure her, though a flicker of concern crossed her face. She'd never said it out loud, but she always thought Nathan was a bit much, too focused on his career, too caught up in the image of the perfect couple in the perfect condo. Jessica sighed, gazing at the horizon beyond the backyard. "I know, Mom. It's just, I miss how things used to be. Simpler." That's when her phone, left on the patio table, buzzed. The sound was jarring, slicing through the afternoon's peace. Jessica approached and saw the name flashing on the screen. Mrs. Linda, neighbor, 21st floor. A spike of irritation. Mrs. Linda was the epitome of condo gossip. The woman with a panoramic view not just of the city, but of everyone's lives, and an urgent need to narrate every detail. Jessica almost didn't answer, but a vague curiosity, or perhaps the boredom of routine, made her swipe the screen. "Mrs. Linda, good afternoon." "Are you?" The voice on the other end cut her off, shrill, laced with genuine panic that froze Jessica's smile in place. "Jessica, listen to me. For the love of God, listen." Jessica's heart lurched. "What's wrong? Is everything okay?" "It's Nathan." Mrs. Linda's voice cracked. Jessica, Nathan just left here in an ambulance." The world stopped. A ringing in Jessica's ears drowned out the birds and the rustle of clothes on the line. The metal clothesline pole, which she gripped with one hand, swayed, making the baby outfits dance like innocent ghosts. "An ambulance?" Jessica's voice came out raw, an octave higher than usual. "Why? Did he have a heart attack? An accident?" "No, it wasn't that." The neighbor swallowed hard, the sound audible through the line. "He wasn't alone, honey." Her voice dropped to a dramatic, anguished whisper. "There was a woman with him, a young woman, blonde, slim. She looked bad, really bad. Hand Nathan to Jessica." He was panicked. His face was ashen. "I saw it from my window, the ambulance parked at the service entrance, them loading the woman onto a stretcher and him climbing in after, desperate. Was it someone from your family at your condo?" Each word was a needle of ice piercing Jessica's spine. A woman, a young woman, looked bad. Nathan panicked. The information collided in her brain, making no sense, forming an image both vivid and incomprehensible. Her heart raced, pounding against her sternum with a force that stole her breath. A wave of heat, followed instantly by an icy chill, swept through her body. Her hands began to tremble uncontrollably. Are you sure, Mrs. Linda? It could have been a mistake. Jessica, I swear on my mother's soul, I saw it with my own eyes. It was him, and a woman. Who was she? I couldn't see clearly, so I'm calling to see if I can help." Without responding, Jessica ended the call. Her cold, clumsy fingers frantically searched for Nathan's contact on her phone. She pressed his name. The call went through, ringing, ringing. The repetitive sound echoed in her ear, each tone an eternity. Then, the recorded voice. The person you are calling is out of coverage or powered off. Nothing. She tried again. Her fingers pressed the screen hard. Ringing, ringing. The same silence on the other end, the same message. Nothing. A third attempt. The same thing. Nothing. Just the void. The absence of a response more terrifying than any bad news. "Jess, honey, what happened?" Mrs. Karen's voice came from the porch door, full of alarm. Jessica turned. Her face was pale, her lips slightly blue. Her whole body shook as if she were in a frozen room. She couldn't speak. She just shook her head, tears starting to well in her eyes, not from sadness yet, but from pure, raw shock. Mrs. Karen crossed the distance in seconds and pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. "Talk to me, honey, what did Linda say?" Nathan," Jessica choked, her voice a thread. "Ambulance. He was with a woman. She said he was with another woman, Mom." Mrs. Karen's arms tightened. "Calm down. Breathe. It could be a misunderstanding. That woman lives for gossip." But the desperation in Mrs. Linda's account had sounded real, and Nathan's complete unavailability was a concrete fact, heavy as a stone. Jessica pulled away from her mother's embrace. Her eyes still teary, fixed on a distant point in the void. The confusion and fear gave way to a primal, clear decision. She couldn't stay there. She couldn't wait. Every second of uncertainty was torture. Without a word, she went inside, her steps quick and determined. She grabbed the car keys from the kitchen counter. Her half-unpacked suitcase in the bedroom was zipped shut in a rush. The zipper's screech was the only sound she made. "Where are you going, Jessica? You're in no condition to drive." Her mother followed, her voice thick with worry. "There's only one emergency hospital in the city," Jessica replied, her voice strangely calm, as if all her energy was channeled into action. "Vanderbilt University Medical Center. That's where he must have gone. That's where I'm going." Her face was pale, but her eyes were dry and focused. The trembling in her body had given way to a steel-like tension. She ignored the weight of her belly, the dull ache in her back. There was only one goal: get to Nathan, uncover the truth, face whatever was waiting on the other side of that drive. She walked out the front door, leaving Mrs. Karen standing on the threshold, watching her pregnant daughter get into the car with a determination that was frightening. The backyard gate closed with a metallic thud. The roar of the SUV's diesel engine echoed in the quiet street. Jessica adjusted the rearview mirror, her hands still slightly shaky but steady on the wheel. She didn't look back at the safe house, at her worried mother. Her eyes were fixed on the road ahead, toward Nashville, toward the hospital, toward her husband, and the terrifying mystery now surrounding her life. The car sped off, leaving behind the clothesline of baby outfits, swaying gently in the afternoon breeze, a silent and naive testament to a future that, in a matter of minutes, had shattered. The drive from Franklin to Nashville had never felt so endless. Each mile was agony, a question hammering in her skull to the rhythm of the engine. Her 8-month belly, once carried with sweet pride, was now an oppressive weight, pressing against the steering wheel with every sharp turn, brutally reminding her of the life growing inside her, while the life she'd built with Nathan crumbled. The tears, forming a watery veil over her eyes, were wiped away with the back of her hand, angrily, desperately. She couldn't afford to lose sight. She had to get there. And in the midst of the internal chaos, a morbid ritual. She grabbed her phone, mounted on the dashboard holder, and dialed Nathan. Once, twice, 3 times during the drive. The same sequence repeated. His smiling face in the contact photo gave way to the call screen. Ringing. Ringing. The monotonous, merciless sound was followed by silence. He still wasn't answering. That silence was more eloquent than any excuse. It was a black hole sucking in all her certainties. When the lights of Vanderbilt University Medical Center finally appeared in the distance, a new kind of cold gripped her, no longer the chill of shock, but the chill of imminent reality. She parked the car haphazardly in a handicapped spot, not caring. Her legs were wobbly as she got out, the baby pressing on her bladder, making her limp slightly. Her right hand instinctively went to her lower back, trying to ease the radiating ache. That's when she saw it. Parked in the emergency zone, a macabre confirmation of everything Mrs. Linda had said. The ambulance. White, red, silent now, but carrying the aura of the drama it had transported. Jessica's chest tightened, a physical sensation of a steel fist closing around her lungs. That vehicle was tangible proof. It wasn't a nightmare. It was real. The sliding glass door of the main entrance opened with a hiss. The smell of antiseptic and disinfectant hit her nostrils, a clinical odor promising order amid chaos, but to her smelling of panic. The reception area was a low hum of voices, the creak of a gurney being moved in the distance, the electronic beep of a monitor. She approached the counter, her sweaty, dust-streaked hands resting on the cold formica surface. The woman behind the counter, in light blue scrubs with a weary expression etched into her face, typed something on the computer without looking up. Jessica swallowed hard, forcing her voice out. It sounded rough, broken. "I'm looking for my husband, Nathan. He came in by ambulance. I don't know the time, I'm not sure of anything. Can you help me?" The woman finally looked up. Her eyes scanned Jessica, head to toe, pausing for a fraction of a second on her prominent belly. There was a flicker of something, pity, before the professional mask returned. Her fingers, with short, practical nails, danced across the keyboard. Her eyes scanned the screen. "Yes," she said, her voice neutral. He was admitted, accompanied by Ms. Megan Taylor. Accompanied. The word wasn't just heard, it was felt. A physical, dry impact in the center of Jessica's chest. Accompanied. The word echoed in her skull, losing its meaning of simple companionship and taking on obscene, treacherous contours. Mrs. Linda hadn't made it up. There was a woman, and she had a name. Megan Taylor. The name was ordinary, but in the receptionist's mouth it sounded like a verdict. The receptionist, oblivious to the earthquake she'd triggered, turned and gestured to a nurse passing in the hallway. "Sarah, please, it's about the patient Nathan who came in earlier with Ms. Taylor." The nurse, Sarah according to her badge, approached. Her eyes, seasoned and hardened by years of shifts, scanned Jessica. Recognition was instant, not personal, but of a type of situation. The pregnant wife, arriving after the husband who came in accompanied. It was a story as old as hospitals themselves, and then the nurse gave that smile. A small, tense smile that didn't reach her eyes, a smile of professional awkwardness, of someone about to deliver a bombshell. "Are you family?" Sarah asked, her voice soft but her eyes piercing. "His wife, perhaps?" Jessica felt her throat close. She tried to speak, but only a nod came, a short, sharp movement of her head. "Yes, I'm the wife. The 8-month pregnant wife. The wife who didn't know her husband was in the hospital. The wife who found out from a nosy neighbor. The wife now hearing another woman's name tied to his." The nurse took a deep breath, a sigh heavy with the weight of countless strangers' dramas. Her eyes met Jessica's with a frankness that was almost cruel. "You'd better see it with your own eyes," she said, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. "I don't think you'll like what happened, but it's better to see than to hear from someone else." Each syllable was a nail in the coffin of the life Jessica knew. See with your own eyes. What would it be? Was he injured, burned, disfigured? And this Megan? What had happened that was so terrible it needed to be seen, not told? Jessica's imagination ran wild, conjuring horrific, nebulous scenarios, each worse than the last. The nurse gestured for Jessica to follow. She turned and started walking down a side corridor, quieter than the reception area. The lights were dimmer here. The antiseptic smell was stronger. The sound of their footsteps and Jessica's echoed on the cold ceramic floor. Jessica followed, her body moving as if filled with sand. Her belly, once a familiar weight, now felt like a lead anchor dragging her down. Each step was an effort. The pain in her back intensified, a sharp stab with every movement. The nurse didn't look back but unconsciously slowed her pace, adapting to the pregnant woman's slow, heavy rhythm, carrying not just a child, but the crushing weight of a truth about to be revealed. She didn't know what she'd find at the end of that corridor. A desperate Nathan? A remorseful Nathan? An injured Nathan needing her? Or a Nathan who was a complete stranger, the center of a medical and personal scandal she couldn't even imagine? The nurse stopped at a door. Not a patient room, but an observation or reserved case wing. Her hand rested on the metal handle. Jessica's heart, already racing and erratic, seemed to stop for a second before resuming with brutal force, throbbing in her neck, her ears. It felt like a ball of iron, a dead, icy weight in her chest, infinitely heavier than her belly, heavier than her entire body. That heart, which once beat for love of Nathan, now braced for the impact of a sight that she knew instinctively would change everything forever. The nurse Sarah guided Jessica through one last stretch of corridor, quieter and gloomier than the others. The doors here were closed, some with lights off in the inspection windows. The air was still, heavy. Each of Jessica's steps echoed like a funeral drum in her own ears. Her heart, that lead weight in her chest, beat so hard she could almost see it moving the fabric of her dress. Her sweaty hand slipped on the cold wall, seeking support the world around her seemed to deny. The nurse stopped at door 312, a simple number, white on a brown plaque. Her professional, calm hand rested on the handle. She gave Jessica one last look, a mix of warning and pity that made the pregnant woman's stomach churn. "He's in here," Sarah said, her low voice breaking the oppressive silence. And then she opened the door. The room was small, lit by the cold glow of a fluorescent ceiling light. There was an empty hospital bed, the sheets pristine and taut, as if no one had ever lain on them. And sitting in a rigid plastic chair against the opposite wall was Nathan. He was alone. The woman, Megan, was nowhere in sight. He sat with his head bowed, his face completely hidden by his hands. His elbows rested on his knees, his posture one of total collapse. His shoulders, usually broad and confident, were slumped forward, as if carrying the weight of the world. Jessica froze at the threshold. All the blood seemed to drain from her face, leaving a cadaverous chill. Her muscles locked. The image she'd expected, Nathan injured, Nathan hooked to tubes, Nathan being consoled by a lover, didn't materialize. That solitude, that emptiness in the room where she expected to find the other woman, was a subtler, deeper violence. The absence of the woman hurt more than her presence ever could have. What had happened that took her away and left him in that state? She took 2 steps into the room. The movement broke the spell. The air seemed to flee her lungs, leaving her light, dizzy. The sound of the door closing behind her made Nathan jerk his head up. His eyes were red, swollen, with deep purple circles. His skin was pale, almost greenish. Seeing Jessica standing a few feet away, his eyes widened, and he leapt to his feet, the chair scraping the floor. "Jess? How did you know I was here?" His voice was rough, laced with shock and unmistakably fear. Not the fear of an injured man, but the fear of a man caught. Jessica stared at him. The tears she'd held back during the drive and the wait at reception now spilled over, silent and hot, streaming down her face and soaking the collar of her dress. She didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, mute witnesses to her pain. "That doesn't matter," she said, her voice a stolen whisper. "Who was the woman? What are you doing here, Nathan?" He ran a hand over his face, a nervous, evasive gesture she knew well. It was what he did when cornered, when he needed to buy time. "Jess, I can't talk yet." His voice was a thread, a pathetic attempt to delay the inevitable. The anger surged then, a sudden intense heat that replaced the initial cold. She stepped closer, her pregnant body moving with a difficulty that felt like a physical accusation against him. Her round, hard belly nearly touched him, a living barrier between them. "You can't talk!" Her voice exploded in the small room, echoing off the bare walls. "I drove here thinking you were dying, that you'd had an accident, a heart attack. I drove half pregnant in a panic. And you were in an ambulance with another woman, and you tell me you can't talk." Nathan shrank before her fury. His body, which always seemed strong and protective, seemed to shrink, collapsing into his wrinkled dress shirt. He looked away, fixing his eyes on the floor, unable to bear the weight of her gaze. "It's not what you're thinking," he tried, but the words sounded hollow, ridiculous. "Then tell me what it is," she shouted, her hands trembling at her sides. "Who is Megan Taylor, Nathan? Who is she?" He shook his head, still staring at the floor. "Please, Jess, it's better if you go home. This isn't good for you or the baby. When I get out of here, I'll go home and explain." His voice was a plea, the final tactic of a man with no defenses left. Explain at home. The phrase sounded grotesque. What could he explain about being in a hospital with another woman? What excuse could exist for that? The strength holding Jessica up began to drain. Her legs threatened to give way. The world spun slightly. She took a step back, two, until the backs of her thighs hit the edge of another plastic chair, identical to the one he'd been sitting in. She didn't sit. She just leaned on that rigid structure, her hands gripping the edges so tightly her knuckles turned white. The synthetic leather was cold and rough under her fingers, a tiny anchor in a sea of turmoil. She stood there, pregnant with his child, facing the man she loved, who'd sworn fidelity and he couldn't even meet her eyes. The pain was a living animal, gnawing at her insides. The room smelled of hospital cleanliness and despair. And then, at the peak of that loaded silence, full of everything unsaid, the door opened again. A man entered. He wore a pristine white coat over a suit, Dr. Thompson, according to his badge. His face was serious, professional, but his eyes carried the shadow of a difficult conversation. In his right hand, he held a large manila envelope, sealed, ordinary, but in that context, it seemed the most sinister object in the world. The Dr. Thompson entered with a quick step, his eyes fixed on a clipboard, already speaking before noticing there was someone else in the room besides Nathan. Nathan, the removal surgery was a success. The patient is stable, no complications. We'll keep her under observation for... He finally looked up and saw Jessica. His words died in the air. The doctor's professional face became carefully neutral, but a slight discomfort crossed his eyes. He recognized the situation with the speed of someone used to family dramas. Jessica heard nothing after the first word. A high-pitched ringing took over her ears. She clutched her chest with her free hand, as if she could contain the heart threatening to burst from her throat. "Surgery?" Her voice tore through the air, a raw, incredulous scream. "What surgery?" Dr. Thompson hesitated. His gaze flicked from Jessica, pale and trembling, to Nathan, who seemed to have aged 10 years in 10 seconds. The dynamic in the room was palpable, charged with a tension far beyond a simple medical emergency. May I speak?" the doctor asked, addressing Nathan directly, deferring to him the authority over that ticking time bomb. Nathan didn't answer with words. He put both hands on his head, fingers digging into his hair, and started pacing in the small space between the empty bed and the wall. His steps were short, erratic, the movement of a caged animal. "My God," he groaned, his voice muffled by his hands. "It's over, everything's over." The unspoken confession, screamed through his despair, was clearer than any explanation. Jessica felt the floor shift beneath her feet. The nurse hadn't warned her for no reason. There was something to be seen. Something horrific. Dr. Thompson, taking Nathan's silence and agony as consent, made a professional decision. The truth, however bad, was always cleaner than speculation. He opened the manila envelope. The sound of paper being handled was absurdly loud. From inside, he pulled an X-ray, a black and white film. He said nothing more. He just held the film out to Jessica. Her cold, numb fingers closed around the plastic edge. She raised the film to the fluorescent ceiling light and saw. The image was clear, unmistakable. The outline of a female pelvis, and lodged deep within an object completely inappropriate, utterly out of place, something that should never be there. Its shape was strange, displaced, a blot of absurdity in the clinical context. It wasn't an accidental foreign body. It was silent, shocking evidence of an act of recklessness so profound that Jessica's mind struggled to process it. The doctor, maintaining a clinical tone that sounded surreal in the face of that revelation, explained in a flat, almost robotic voice. According to their account, they were playing with this, he said, the word playing sounding grotesque and childish in context. The object went in and wouldn't come out. Emergency surgery was required to remove it. There was no permanent damage, but the situation was high risk. The silence that followed wasn't just the absence of sound. It was an abyss opening in the center of the room, swallowing all sounds, all colors, all the certainties Jessica had ever held. She slowly lowered the X-ray. her eyes disbelieving what they'd seen, but knowing, with a cutting clarity, that it was real. She turned to Nathan. He'd stopped pacing and was now staring at her, his face a map of shame and terror. Tears streamed freely down his cheeks. Jessica's gaze was no longer one of anger. It was something worse, a profound, devastating realization. It was the look of someone seeing for the first time the true face of the person they love. And that face was monstrous. "You," her voice came out as a broken whisper, "did this? With her? While I was at my mom's washing our baby's clothes? You were doing this?" The question didn't seek an answer. She already had it, printed in black and white on that X-ray film. Nathan collapsed. His knees buckled and he leaned on the empty bed, his body racked with convulsive sobs. "I didn't mean to," he cried, his voice unrecognizable, thick with mucus and despair. "I shouldn't have. It was a mistake. A huge mistake. I don't know what happened, Jess, I swear. We were drinking and it was a moment of insanity. I'm sorry. Please, I'm sorry." His words were weak, insignificant, tiny against the enormity of what had happened. They were the excuses of a teenager caught red-handed, not of a man nearing 40, a successful architect, a husband about to become a father. Jessica watched him cry and felt nothing. The anger had burned out, the pain had numbed. There was only a vast, silent void, a void that needed to be filled with distance, with safety, for her and the child stirring in her belly as if sensing the danger. She took a step back. Her heel hit the plastic chair, another step, increasing the distance between her and this man who had suddenly become a dangerous stranger. Another step. Her hand instinctively protected the curve of her belly, an ancient gesture of shielding her young from a threat. She began, her voice strangely clear and steady, cutting through the noise of his sobs. "I'm going to my mom's." She paused, her dry, hard eyes meeting his, red and swollen. "Don't contact me." The phrase wasn't a request. It was an order, a decree. Without waiting for a response, without looking at the doctor, she turned. Her legs, which had trembled before, now moved with steel-like firmness. She opened the door and walked out, not running, not hesitating. The sound of the door closing behind her was the sound of a chapter ending. Nathan remained anchored to the bed, his face still buried in his hands. The doctor, Dr. Thompson, silently took the X-ray Jessica had left behind, slipping it back into the envelope. The silence in room 312 was now complete, broken only by the muffled, pathetic sound of a man's crying. A man who had just lost everything, not by fate's accident, but by a stupid, selfish choice. He was grounded, annihilated, staring at the door through which his pregnant wife had walked, limping but infinitely stronger and whole than he would ever be. The car pulled into the garage of the house in Franklin, and the silence inside the vehicle was heavier than when Jessica had left. Mrs. Karen was waiting at the door, her face a mix of anxiety and dread. Seeing her daughter get out of the car, moving slowly, her face washed and marked by a pain no longer sharp but deep and silent, she asked no questions. She just opened her arms. Jessica collapsed into her mother's embrace, right there on the garage driveway, and she told her. The words came in a steady monochromatic stream, without hysteria, without tears. Those had dried during the drive back. She told of the ambulance, the receptionist, the nurse, Nathan alone in the room, the doctor and the manila envelope. She described the X-ray in clinical detail, her voice flat as if reporting a car accident she'd witnessed. The only thing she didn't do was say what the object was. That detail was hers, a macabre trophy of her humiliation, and she would keep it forever. Mrs. Karen listened, horrified, her own heart breaking at seeing her daughter narrate the end of her marriage with the coldness of a coroner. When Jessica finished, a thick silence settled over the two women. "My girl," Mrs. Karen whispered, squeezing Jessica's hand. "My poor girl." Then Jessica's phone rang. The screen lit up with Nathan's photo, smiling, a relic of a past era. She looked at the screen, her face still. She let it ring until it went to voicemail. He called again. And again. On the third try, with fingers that didn't tremble, she swiped the screen, went into the contact settings and blocked the number. The silence returned. It was a simple act, but with the weight of an iron door slamming shut. The messages started coming. Notifications popped up on the screen. "Jess, please. Let me explain. I love you. It was a mistake. Don't do this to me, to our family." She read each one, her eyes scanning the words without expression. She didn't reply to any. After half an hour of bombardment, she silenced the notifications. His digital world was now as inaccessible to him as the real one. 2 days later, he showed up at the house. Jessica saw him from the bedroom window, standing outside the gate, hands in his pockets, his face pale and unshaven. He looked like a man on the edge of collapse. Mrs. Karen went to meet him. Jessica didn't hear the conversation, but she saw her mother shake her head firmly, arms crossed. She saw Nathan gesture, plead. He tried to look up at the bedroom window, but Jessica stepped back, her heart pounding, not with love or longing, but with deep revulsion. He stayed for 15 more minutes before leaving, shoulders slumped, defeated. She didn't go down. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Megan was discharged 3 days later. There were no flowers, no visitors, no man waiting for her. A hospital staff member escorted her to the exit. She left alone, head down, her face hidden by a hoodie, her steps hurried, ashamed, not looking at anyone. She took a cab at the corner and vanished. No one in the condo, not even the all-powerful Mrs. Linda, could find out who she was or where she went. She became a ghost, a sordid detail in the unfolding story. Jessica never returned to the upscale condo in Nashville. The idea of stepping foot in that place, breathing the air he and that woman had breathed, seeing the bed where she couldn't. A week later, she asked her mother to go there to get her things and the babies. Mrs. Karen, armed with a lioness's determination to protect her cub, went to the condo. Nathan was home. He opened the door, and the sight of his mother-in-law, her face stern, was another blow. He tried to speak, but Mrs. Karen cut him off. "I'm just here to get my daughter's and my granddaughter's things," she said, walking in without ceremony. He stood in the living room, watching helplessly as she packed suitcases in the bedroom that had been Jessica's, in the nursery that would never know its father. The silence between them was more eloquent than any argument. When Mrs. Karen left, dragging the suitcases, she didn't say a word. The condo door closed and Nathan was left alone in that large, empty space, now echoing with the sound of his own mistakes. The neighbors speculated. The whispers in the hallways at the concierge desk by the pool were constant. The pregnant wife disappeared. He's always alone looking down. They say another woman was involved. Something happened at the hospital, but no one knew the truth. The facts were murky, distorted by the condo's game of telephone. The only certainty was that Jessica had left home pregnant and never returned. Nathan, consumed by a shame that burned inside like acid, told no one anything. Not even his parents, who called worried, receiving only vague answers about a tough time in the marriage. He became a recluse. He went to work and came home, avoiding eye contact in the elevator, declining happy hour invites. His life, once a model of success, unraveled in silence, piece by piece, in the emptiness of that silent condo. Meanwhile, in Franklin, Jessica pressed on. The initial shock gave way to an iron resolve. She handled the final days of pregnancy with near-obsessive focus. She did the last checkups alone or with her mother, filling the space a father should have occupied at the ultrasounds. The sadness hadn't vanished, but it was channeled into preparing for motherhood. She set up the nursery in her mother's house, assembled the crib, folded and refolded the baby clothes. Each small task was a brick in the new life she was building, a wall between her and the past. Her life, painful but hers, began to reorganize with quiet solidity, while his on the other side of the city continued to unravel day by day, in the deafening echo of his own silence and bad choices. Time, a harsh but effective remedy, passed. The final days of pregnancy dragged with heavy discomfort, but Jessica endured each pain with silent serenity. She no longer carried just a child, she carried her own resilience. And then, the day came. The contractions started in the early hours, waves of pressure pulling her from sleep. Mrs. Karen, alert as a sentinel, was by her side in seconds. There was no panic, just calm, determined movement. In the car on the way to the hospital, Jessica breathed deeply, her face turned to the dark window. There was no room to think of Nathan. There was only the physical present, the work to be done. In the delivery room, under bright lights and the monotonous beeps of monitors, she focused. Her mother's hand was her anchor. When the pain peaked, she didn't cry out for an absent husband. She clenched her teeth and pushed, channeling all her pain, anger, and hope into that primal act. And then a cry. Sharp, vigorous, full of pure indignation at the cold, new world. The baby was born strong, healthy, and beautiful. A girl. When they placed her in Jessica's arms, a tiny bundle of warmth and life, Jessica cried, but they weren't tears of the pain that had brought her there. They were tears of a love so vast and overwhelming that, for a moment, it washed away all memory of the betrayal, the X-ray, the shame. She looked at her daughter, at the dark eyes blinking, trying to focus, and felt, with a certainty from her core, there, in that hospital bed, a new world began. A world without Nathan. A world just for them. She named her Chloe. A few weeks later, settled in the cozy room at her mother's house, Jessica sat on the couch, nursing. The afternoon light streamed in softly, illuminating the baby's serene face. That's when her phone rang. It was Mrs. Linda, on a video call. Jessica sighed. The exhaustion of new motherhood made her more tolerant. She answered. The neighbor appeared on the screen, her face filling the frame, her eyes gleaming with the unquenchable flame of curiosity. "Honey, you look more beautiful than ever since becoming a mom. Glowing. I've missed seeing you around here." Jessica offered a small smile. "Thanks, Mrs. Linda." The woman couldn't hold back. She leaned closer to the camera, lowering her voice to a confidential tone. "And Nathan? He's moping around, always alone, looking down, asking the neighbors for advice, but no one knows the real reason for the split. He never told." She paused dramatically. "Want to vent to me?" Jessica looked at the screen, at the eyes hungry for a scoop. And then, something inside her settled completely. The anger was gone. The need to explain, to justify, had evaporated. There was only a deep peace, hard-won. She simply replied with a serenity that sounded like a closed door. "Mrs. Linda, some things don't need to be said. My daughter and I are fine. That's what matters." The neighbor seemed slightly disappointed, but then a genuine smile mixed with affection and respect crossed her face. She nodded, almost in admiration. "And you are. He lost, you know? Lost big time." The call ended. Silence returned to the room, broken only by the soft sound of Chloe's breathing. Jessica looked at the crib where her daughter now slept, tiny fists clenched near her face, in total peace. And finally, she realized, her life hadn't ended in that hospital room when the doctor walked in with the envelope. It had begun again. All the pain had been the necessary prelude to a stronger, cleaner, truer rebirth. Nathan kept trying. Messages from unknown numbers, flowers that went straight to the trash, handwritten letters she read once and then tore up. The pleas for forgiveness were echoes of a distant world. But Jessica never went back. She didn't need revenge or public humiliation. Her victory was silent, intimate. She closed the cycle of that marriage with the final key of forgiveness, not for him, but for herself. She forgave herself for believing, for building on sand. She became a mother, not as an abandoned woman, but as a whole one. And she moved forward at peace, light, finally free of the weight of what in the end she never deserved. And there you have it. What did you think? On a scale of 0 to 10, what score would you give it? Leave your comments telling me the part that impacted you most in the story, drop a like to help me out, and subscribe to follow our next narratives. Thank you so much for joining me, and see you in the next video.